Sid Meier's Civilization, the game series that lets you build the pyramids in New York, upgrade your cavalry into helicopters, and then nuke France. Ah, Civilization. What a great game series you are. But who the hell is Sid Meier? It recently occurred to me, I've put a few thousand hours into this guy's games, and I don't even really know who he is. I at least know that he was a real man who made video games, because I have met multiple people who thought he was just like a company mascot. Sid Meier's Pirates? Mario Golf, that kind of thing. First of all, I assure you, he is a very real man. But I've been playing a lot of Civ lately, and while I started thinking to myself that with how much entertainment he's provided me, the least I could do is learn who he really is and what he's about. So, I read articles, I watched interviews, I got a copy of the man's book, and it turns out there is some really entertaining stuff in here that I want to tell you about. I'm going to tell you about the strange connection that Robin Williams has to Sid Meier in his games. I'm gonna do some internet archaeology on the nuclear Gandhi meme and its origins. And toward the end, we're gonna get into the bizarre legal battle of how Hasbro, of all companies, owned the rights to Civilization for a bit. That is, before Sid activated his secret weapon to get the rights back. I don't know what to call this, but if you guys like it, maybe I'll come up with a series name and I can talk about other developers in the future. Comment below for what other devs you'd like me to talk about and what I should call this thing. Game Dev Doc Verac, I don't fucking know. Let's get on with it. Get comfy, relax, make yourself some tea, and I'm gonna tell you the story about the legendary game designer who created Civilization as we know it. The first thing you need to understand about Sid Meier is this. Much in the same way that your dad just wants to grill, Sid has always just wanted to make games. He got a job out of college working for General Instrument, who was an electronics manufacturer of the time, and they told him to work on the thrilling business of networked cash register systems. He was grateful to have a good job, of course, but he couldn't help himself from making little games on the company network where interested coworkers could play them. The first sign that he knew what he was doing was when he made a little Star Trek game in 1979. He only shared it with a few interested coworkers at first, but it spread so fast that eventually so many people were playing it that it was lagging the entire General Instrument network. Even the managers who had to tell him to delete the game were playing it themselves. So, knowing what a compelling game he just made, this was a band that Sid wore with pride. Not too long after that, in 1982, Sid would meet a man named Bill Steely. Sid was an introverted, humble programmer, whereas Bill Steely, Reserve Air Force pilot, would hand out business cards with the words Fighter Pilot Supreme printed on them.
The tasteful thickness of it. Oh my god.
They both worked for General Instrument, but Bill wasn't a programmer. He was a businessman, a level 10 charisma kind of guy. The type of guy who joins the Reserve Air Force despite needing to wear glasses and somehow gets let in anyway. He passed a speech check or something, I have no idea. But basically, Bill was the extroverted opposite of Sid, and the unexpectedly perfect match for making a game development company. He, Sid, and the rest of General Instrument were sent to Las Vegas one year for a conference. Forced to sit through meeting after meeting, Sid was falling asleep. He decided to strike up a conversation with Bill, who was next to him, out of desperation to stay awake. They didn't really know each other and had barely anything in common, but Bill was more than happy to whisper excitedly about all of his flying stories. That's when Sid mentioned, "I'm making a flying simulator game in my spare time." Bill was thrilled by this. He immediately suggested that they should start a company together. Sid, unsure of how serious Bill was being, replied with, yeah man, anyway, let's go find an arcade after this conference is over, okay? So that's what they did.
There was a game called Red Baron, and I challenged Sid to play that game. I sat down and scored 35,000 points. Sid sat down and scored 65,000 points, and I was pissed. I hate to lose. Sid said I asked him how he beat me. He said he memorized all the algorithms. He watched it once and memorized where they put up the bad guys. He said, Bill, that's not a very good game. I could write a better one in a week. I had to say, if you could, I could sell it.
That last line by Bill there would come to summarize most of their working relationship and the early history of their company that they founded together, Microprose. Together they made Microprose into a smash success in very little time. This is the period of Sid's career that I like to refer to as 1 billion flying games, because Microprose started pumping that shit out. I'm talking Hellcat Ace, Chopper Rescue, Spitfire Ace, Wingman, Solo Flight, Air Rescue 1, F-15 Strike Eagle, Gunship, F-19 Stealth Fighter, and F-15 Strike Eagle 2. This shit was popular and profitable. Sid and Bill were both able to quit their day jobs at General Instrument pretty early on and focus entirely on their new business together. Sid would program, and Bill would handle the marketing, labeling himself as Wild Bill, and making sure to always wear his Air Force uniform during interviews and for any company photos. Bill was very much content to keep this flying game train chugging along, but Sid, well, you can only make so many flying simulators before you start to burn out a little. He started dabbling with some other ideas. Ideas that were initially scoffed at, but would later become some of the most memorable parts of his legacy. Sid Meier is known today primarily for Civilization, but there are some of you out there who may have heard of him through a couple other big hits. Of course, I'm talking about those of you who have played Sid Meier's CPU Bach for the 3DO! No, I'm talking about Sid Meier's Pirates and Sid Meier's Railroad Tycoon. It all started with pirates. Sid had been making realistic flight simulators for years at that point. As real as you could get for the time, anyway. These flight sims were selling well, but the creative part of him needed to make something else. Anything else. He wanted to make a pirate game. What would he want to play? He knew he didn't want a hyper-realistic pirate boat combat simulator. He wanted an adventure game. A pirate adventure game that put you in all the best moments of a pirate's swashbuckling life. And what he wanted to play was a risky venture, because there weren't many games like it. Most adventure games of the time were of a certain style, one that Sid could not stand.
The go-to door!
Go-to door! What's going on?
I don't know how to do that. Leave door.
They were typically text only, the kind that involved a lot of reading and arguing with the computer.
And you'd be all like, get ye flask. And it'd say, you can't get ye flask. And you just have to sit there and imagine why on earth you can't get ye flask. Because the game's certainly not going to tell you. And there's no precious graphics to help you out either.
Around the Microprose office, these games were deridingly known as pick-up stick games, and Sid was adamant that he would not be making his pirate adventure game idea into one of those. The problem with these games to Sid was that there was only one correct path. You needed to get ye flask to proceed, but if you wanted to get ye flask, you needed to type in a very specific string of words that the computer would recognize. The bigger problem with this was that to get those string of words, you would have to go through potentially infinite wrong answers. So, Sid wanted a pirate game where you weren't stuck on one singular narrative path, but you also didn't have infinite options to get wrong. It was my job, I thought, to whittle down the options and present only the best ones to the player. So then, no wrong answers, and more than one right answer, but not too many. I began to jot down ideas. Pirates wooed beautiful young women, so that would be a choice. Pirates pieced together old treasure maps, so that would be a choice. Pirates sometimes had sword fights, so that would be a choice. Real pirates didn't do any of these things, of course. Real pirates slaughtered innocent people and got scurvy. Not fun. I think we can agree on the getting scurvy part not being fun anyway, but the key here was that Sid was going to make a game with a heightened, romanticized feeling. Everything you've ever heard or seen about pirates in media up to 1987 was here, was doable, and what you've always wanted to play out for yourself if you had ever read Treasure Island or watched The Princess Bride. Now, Bill Steely and the rest of the sales team were incredibly against releasing something like this. It was too different. It was weird. It was unlike anything Microprose had released before, which, of course, is exactly why Sid wanted to make it. Bill would try to talk him out of it, but he realized it was no use. Sid was determined, and fortunately, Bill trusted Sid enough to let him make it anyway. Because Sid Meier's Pirates would go on to become one of Microprose's most popular titles of all time. It was also the first game to use Sid Meier's name as part of the branding. I think a lot of people wonder when they first play one of his games, why put your name on it? I know I thought it was a little odd when I first saw it myself with Civilization IV. To this day, every time that I want to search for Civilization in my Steam library, I forget that the games actually start with S alphabetically, because Sid Meier's is a very real part of the title. So why did Sid Meier's Pirates, Meier Civilization Meier, start putting his name on everything? Is he just that egotistical? No, not at all. Robin Williams told him to do it. It's a weird and interesting story of piracy within this Sid Meier's Pirates story, and it goes like this. Sid Meier was no stranger to the odd bit of software piracy. As a programmer, he did his fair share of software swapping on floppy disks and sharing of code, so Sid acknowledges that when it comes to pirating his games, he did not have a, and I quote, peg leg to stand on. I have also taken part in sailing the high seas, but this story takes place in a very different time of software piracy. After all, back then, if you were buying software, you were buying a physical copy of it. You were actually paying to own a real product that you could touch with your hands. We're not talking about the live service Adobe model bullshit that we have today. We're talking about a time period where video games were enjoyed to some degree, but not yet recognized as an actual form of media that was worth supporting. People were just making copies of floppy disks without any thought or regard to the guy who made them, which is a problem if you want that guy to make more stuff. This practice needed to change. If nothing had been done about it back then, in the modern day we would never have gotten games that required a lot of financial backing, like Faster Than Light, or Hollow Knight, or Shovel Knight. A lot of rhyming words there, I don't know why, but it's just the way it is. Anyway, these are beloved games that would not have existed without financial support to the developers. So back then, something had to change. Software piracy got so rampant at one point back then that many developers were panicked enough to form a group to try to combat it. This group would be known as the Software Publishers Association, or SPA, something that Bill Steely was eager to join to try to protect Microprose. And of all places, this is where the Robin Williams connection comes in. Sid says in his book, Microprose was one of about 150 companies who attended their regular meetings, along with Sierra, Microsoft, Broderbund, and Robin Williams. Yes, as strange as it may seem, the comedian Robin Williams was connected to the Software Publishers Association. To my knowledge, he never dabbled in game design himself, but he felt strongly that all creative jobs should be fairly compensated. And he had such a particular love for video games that he named his daughter Zelda. According to lore, he and Bill were seated at the same table at an SPA event, and during the course of conversation, Robin pointed out that all the other entertainment industries promoted their stars by name. So why should gaming be any different? Whether this was a passing comment or a hard sell on my name in particular, I have no idea. But Bill already had plenty of experience with fostering a cult of personality. Either way, I can't blame him for wanting to share credit on this one, since Robin Williams told me to do it is a pretty good defense for almost anything. All I know is Bill made the executive decision to call the game Sid Meier's Pirate Whatever, and I was too busy thinking about adventure game mechanics to question it. That's right, You heard me correctly. The guy who's known for putting his name on the titles of all of his games? It wasn't even his decision. He just wanted to make a fun pirate game. He didn't care what it was called. And there it began. Putting his name on the box would become an important part of Sid Meier's legacy from there on. This branding decision happened again later when Sid once again got bored of making flying simulators and went on to one of his childhood inspirations. Trains! That's right, he has that kind of autism, and I love him for it. He made what would become Sid Meier's Railroad Tycoon, which, like Pirates, would end up being one of Microprose's most famous titles and part of Sid's legacy as a game developer to this day. But again, before its release, Bill did not particularly want to go through with this weird, risky railroad game. Pirates hadn't really seen its success quite yet, and the flying simulators were so much more profitable in the short term. But he trusted his business partner, so Sid's name was slapped on the box again, which is when Sid began to realize something. His name being put on the box, ironically, was actually an indicator of low confidence from the marketing department. It was their message to him: the game you're making is too risky and unusual, we need your name to sell it or it'll never work. To put this in perspective, here's a quick look at the titles of the Microprose games from that time period. Gunship, Sid Meier's Pirates, Red Storm Rising, F-19 Stealth Fighter, F-15 Strike Eagle 2, Sid Meier's Railroad Tycoon. Yeah, the pattern is pretty noticeable. Sid noticed it, and he knew when the marketing department didn't really care for his new weird video game ideas that hadn't been tried yet. But he wasn't discouraged, and he wasn't done yet. He had one more weirdo, unmarketable, non-flying simulator game in him yet that he wanted to try. And this one would change that low confidence impression of his name on the box very, very drastically. Did you know that the first Civilization was almost a real-time strategy game? Part of this initial decision was influenced by the fact that Sid Meier was playing a lot of SimCity at the time. SimCity helped establish the idea of a God game to the public, and it inspired Sid's own God game, with help from Sid's newest working partner, Bruce Shelley. Bruce wasn't a programmer, that was Sid's department, but he was a talented game designer. First, Bruce would co-design Railroad Tycoon with Sid. Look, there he is in his train engineer overalls. And now he would work with Sid in co-designing the first Civilization game. The first versions of Civilization shown to Bruce to playtest were completely real-time, like SimCity, but on a global scale. And by our modern standards of what a Civ game is, it was completely unrecognizable. You could see the whole map from the very beginning. You didn't settle cities, you instead started with pre-settled locations and you spent your time zoning them, and you'd make your farms, you'd plot out your areas for production, and then sit back and watch your empire grow with the march of time. Now, I could see this being kinda cool to see and play out once or twice, but according to Sid, it would get boring pretty quickly and have very little replay value. As he says in his book, unfortunately, neither sit back or watch are features to be proud of in a game. That's what movies are for. Sid is full of good quotes like that. Unrelated to that quote, did you know that 20 years from now, David Cage would release the games Heavy Rain,
Jason!
Beyond Two Souls, and Detroit Become Human?
Do you stay? Do you stay?
Anyway.
I'm sorry.
I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Manscaped. Manscaped is a global men's lifestyle brand that is revolutionizing the landscape of men's grooming. Lawnmower, crop soother, silica gel, do not eat, throw away. These fucking guys. Anyway, here's my package. I mean their package. Behold, the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra. This deal includes their Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, their Weed Whacker 2.0, which isn't Ultra but still very good, and the Crop Soother Plus Preserver. These are all great products that you could buy individually, but in getting the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra, you also get some gifts. The Shed 2.0, which holds all your stuff, and the Boxers 2.0, which holds your stuff. Get it? You get it? It's like balls. Do you get it? Go to manscaped.com and you can get the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra today. Use my code Verac and you'll get 20% off your entire order, plus free international shipping. Thank you very much to Manscaped for sponsoring. Now, back to the video! Sid was hitting a roadblock. Due to the birth of his child and being consumed with tweaking this Civilization prototype, he hadn't published a game in quite a while. And tweaking a prototype does not earn you money. He was told by Bill that he had to put something out. So he brought back a different game he gave up on before, called Covert Action, begrudgingly put the finishing touches on it, and had it sent out for publishing. He wasn't entirely happy with Covert Action, but it gave him space to think about how he could improve Civilization. That's when he decided, why don't I try out a turn-based system instead? And that's when everything fell into place. Making it turn-based was the secret sauce he needed, and now Sid was cooking. He then realized, wouldn't it be a magical, epic feeling to have the rest of the map be unseen and unexplored? And wouldn't it be more interesting, instead of being simply given a city and zoning it, to start from nothing and to make your own decision to choose where to settle your first cities? Symbolically, it felt like the difference between signing a deed for a distant frontier versus driving a flag into the dirt with your own calloused, sweaty hands. The player should plant their first city right where they stood, I decided, or close enough to it, and it should trigger a suitably commemorative full-screen animation. Rome founded 4000 BC. Never mind the covered wagons and simple yurts, this is Rome, capital city of a mighty civilization, and it will be glorious. To this day, when I play Civilization, I almost always choose the Romans. It was at this point in development that Sid started to decide what civilizations should be in the game, and with what leaders. There's hundreds of countries past and present that would warrant being included, and computer limitations of the time would only let him pick 14 of them, so it wasn't easy to choose. He figured he should go with most of the major world powers and then decide from there. Basically, it was decided via Sid Meier's vibe check. Ultimately, Civ 1's world stage would include America, Greece, Rome, England, Germany, Mongolia, Babylon, Japan, India, China, the Aztecs, France, Egypt, the Zulu, and Russia. Sid thought to himself that obviously the civilizations should have their most iconic leaders of all time. At least iconic generally speaking to the average American in 1990. So let's see, we got America, Abe Lincoln. Greece, Alexander the Great. Rome, Caesar. England, Elizabeth I. And Germany, fuck Germany. Sid wanted to include each country's most famous leader, but he also knew that for Germany, this could maybe be a problem. Among other reasons, doing this would make it so that Germany would instantly ban the game. A painful move for micropros, who already had some of their flight simulators banned in Germany at the time for depicting military operations.
Deine Flugzeuge? Verboten. Dein Hubschrauber? Verboten. Du hast keinen Swag, keine Bitches und wenn du den Mann mit dem Schnurrbart in dein nächstes Spiel einbaust, wird es sofort verboten.
Germany's a pretty big market to lose out on, and micropros had just recently painfully fought to get those flight simulator titles taken off of the ban list. Was Sid really gonna get this one intentionally permabanned from the very beginning? Because of this dilemma, Germany almost didn't get included in Civ 1 at all. Sid went back and forth on Germany throughout the game's entire development. They were in, and then they were out, and then they were in, and then they were out, until he finally made the decision, screw it, I'm putting Germany in with Frederick the Great. He's not as well known, he gets overshadowed by the failed painter in the mind of the average normie, but at least he's still a very prominent German leader, and then they get to be in the game. This was such a last-minute decision that the first run of manuals that came with Civ 1 still referred to Germany's former placeholder, the Turks. I played Civ 1 recently with this knowledge in mind, and was kind of surprised to learn that despite all this stuff with Germany, Russia is led by Stalin, and China is led by Mao. There's a poignant quote about this in the book where Sid says, "It's worth noting that Chairman Mao and Stalin both went into the game without any doubt on my part or comment from others. The rules about what was acceptable didn't always make a lot of sense." Fair enough, Sid. fair enough. But really, that's pretty much Civilization as a series. It doesn't make a lot of sense for the leaders to survive as long as they do. But in Civ, that's what you are. An eternal emperor of legend. A god, even. Abraham Lincoln, God Emperor of mankind. I've seen good critiques about Civilization and its historical representation, its inaccuracies, but Civilization is not a game about historical pinpoint accuracy. There are other games that strive for that and succeed well enough. The core principle of Civilization was always, from the very first game, you were rewriting history, not reliving it. A big foundation of Civilization is personal success, something Sid learned from his experience with Sid Meier's Pirates. In Pirates, you had multiple correct answers to victory, multiple interesting decisions you could make. The same is in Civ, which allows you to decide what kind of leader you want to be. When given the reins of power, do you choose to focus on your military and drink out of your opponent's skulls? Or do you want to focus on science and get your genetically engineered cat girls on Mars by the end of the game? Even within these two paths to victory, there are many interesting decisions to be made about your empire's happiness, production, economy, food, and more. Sid Meier would come to be known for a phrase including the words interesting decisions. His feeling is that the best games are a series of interesting decisions. And so far, Civ's prototype is living up to that ideal. But his company life was about to shift pretty drastically, at least legally, and in terms of liability. As the co-founders of Microprose, Sid and Bill often made the most important decisions together. Well, during the time Civilization was in development, Bill told Sid that Microprose needs to start heading in a new direction. That new direction? Arcade cabinets! Sid was a bit baffled by this, accurately recognizing in hindsight that arcades were on the decline. He wanted to continue making software, not hardware and software. Whereas Bill and the marketing team saw Sid's recent non-flight sim games as anomalies, even if they saw some success. They were indulgences that they let him get away with, which in retrospect is pretty insane considering these indulgent games are vastly more memorable than whatever plain nonsense they had him working on before that. Unfortunately, they couldn't come to a compromise on which direction the company should go. Bill was determined on this arcade idea, and Sid, doubtful about the positive impact it would have on the company, decided to sell his half of Microprose to Bill, making him the sole owner. They still wanted to work together. They weren't bitterly breaking up, so they arranged to have Sid continue working at Microprose, but as an independent contractor. His title had changed, but he was still around and making games. But now, he was free to work on whatever he wanted, like his indulgent little god game Empire Simulator, which was nearing completion.
There is no shame in deterrence. Having a weapon is very different from actually using it.
I'd like to take a break from Civilization to instead talk about Civilization. More specifically, a certain ascetic preacher of peace in the Civ games who's known for being unusually hungry for war. His name is Mahatma Only Nuclear Fire Will Quench My Desire, Gandhi. It's a meme. It's a big meme. Probably the best known Civilization meme, and known even by people who haven't played the games. It's easy to understand why. It is inherently hilarious to have the peace advocate Gandhi jump scare you with dialogue telling you that my words are backed with nuclear weapons, so watch your fucking step! And what's even funnier is that it's not real. Well, it is today, kind of. But only because we memed it into existence. The common explanation of the meme goes like this. In Civilization I, all leaders were given a score in their code from 1 to 12 that would determine their aggressiveness. If Genghis Khan was a 12, naturally Gandhi was a 1. When democracy is adopted as a government, though, it would subtract 2 points of aggressiveness from this score.
But in a world of programmed integers, -1 doesn't exist. And this caused his aggression level to underflow from 1 backwards to 255, out of a possible 10.
Cue the Indian nukes dropping on Rome. That story has been commonly understood and repeated by Civ players, myself included, for the last, 10 years. But, according to the guy who coded the entire game, It's not true. Sid notes in his book that he finds the entire thing hilarious, but he also wants to put the facts on the table. That kind of bug comes from something called unsigned characters, which are not the default in the C programming language, and not something I used for leader traits. Brian Reynolds wrote Civ 2 in C++, and he didn't use them either. We received no complaints about a Gandhi bug when either game came out, nor did we send out any revisions for one. Gandhi's military aggressiveness score remained at 1 throughout the game. Well, what the hell then? What's the deal? Why does everybody remember Gandhi being so bloodthirsty if he wasn't actually that way from the beginning like the story goes? First of all, Sid says that it's true that Gandhi would eventually use nukes if India was at war, but every civilization was coded to use nukes at some point. Every leader had a point that they would draw a line in the sand, no matter who they were, and Gandhi would actually take more shit than just about anybody else before drawing that line. So part of the meme's existence might just be that the idea of Gandhi using nukes at all is so memorable that it sticks in your brain. Another part of it is the victory conditions of the game. There were only 2 ways to win in Civ 1. Kill everybody else, or win a science victory. And since Gandhi had low aggression, he would focus heavily on science so that he could get that science victory. Thus, he would often gain the technology to create nukes much earlier than the player, leading him to threatening to nuke the player while the player is still training knights on horseback. You may ask then, why would Gandhi threaten to use nukes at all? Well, the idea was that any civ who didn't want to go to war, like Gandhi, who was coded to be very unaggressive, would make sure to remind the player, hey, remember that thing called mutually assured destruction? Well, I have nukes, so don't fuck with me! The idea was deterrence, even if it comes off a bit, strong. So it's fair to say that Gandhi could, on occasion, seem a little unnecessarily zealous, if only verbally. Some people point to Civilization V as evidence of the meme's reality, but they actually have it backwards. Gandhi was given his nuclear bloodthirst Easter egg in Civ 5 as a reference to the already present hilarity of Gandhi using nukes at all in the Civ community. It had nothing to do with the negative overlapping to 255 thing, and the designer of Civ 5, John Schaefer, had never heard of this when he put his nuclear Gandhi in Civ 5 as a fun Easter egg. So then the question remains, where did the whole coding overflow story come from? Here's the short version. Guy named Tuna Fish on TV Tropes makes it the fuck up. Okay, now I'm gonna give you the bigger, longer, uncut version. In 2012, a guy named Tuna Fish posts to tvtropes.org. This was 2 years after Civilization V, which had the actual first official appearance of nuclear Gandhi, by the way. But for whatever reason, Tuna Fish made a claim on TV Tropes that the nuclear Gandhi thing went as far back as Civilization I due to a coding error. God only knows why he said it. He could have just been trolling. It may have been revealed to him in a dream. He could have been shooting up heroin. Nobody knows. It didn't matter. It was plausible, funny, and on the internet now, and nobody would lie on the internet, so it ran on its own from there. An anonymous user added the story to the Civilization fandom page, called Wikia at the time, which to most of the internet was enough to make it truly official. For a year and a half, the story would spread as a fun little bit of trivia, just here and there around the internet. The real wildfire started in 2014, when the comic Real Life Gandhi vs. Civilization Gandhi was reposted on Reddit. It wasn't even the first time it was shared. It was several years old as a comic, and it wasn't even about the overflow story. But just like Civ 5's inclusion of nuclear Gandhi, the comic was poking fun about Gandhi using nukes at all. Here are some comments from people at the time, confidently declaring this completely wrong information to be well-known trivia. And by the way, I'm not calling these people stupid. The average person does not want to look up and fact-check every single thing they find. I believed this at the time as well, just as these people did. The people who should be investigating and fact-checking these sorts of things, you would think, would be journalists. Fortunately, when the news of this comic's popularity got to the games journalists, our bulwarks of truth and evidence, they dug down deep into this story and found out that the paper trail led to a dead end. They realized it may be unfounded, they went and asked Sid Meier, and then they rushed to let the public know the facts. I'm just kidding. They fell for it too, and they started citing each other as official sources. Kotaku writes a story citing the Reddit comic and the comments. Geek.com does the same. Now it's officially true because they made articles about it. The other gaming websites and blogs published their versions of the story while citing Kotaku as their source. Isn't journalism fun? Did you know that people go to school for this? Okay, let me be a little nicer and say probably part of the reason that it propagated as far as it did for as long as it did is just because it was so funny. We wanted to believe it, myself included. Some part of me still does believe it, even if the guys who made the games tell me it isn't so. But I appreciate Sid's demeanor about the story in the book. He has no intention of debunking the story just to ruin everyone's fun. Sid just puts the facts on the table, but he's more than happy to have Nuclear Gandhi live on in the latest Civ iterations throughout whatever Easter eggs they choose. Gandhi firing nukes is, and always has been, inherently funny, no matter how rarely it actually occurs. I'm glad to see players engage with the game and each other in whatever way makes them happy. So Nuclear Gandhi will live on. Despite us knowing now that the origin story is untrue, and that the Civ 5 Nuclear Gandhi is not in reference to it, the Civilization VI one may have been. After all, Civilization VI came out in a time when basically everyone believed it. Therefore, despite not being real, Nuclear Gandhi also is real. He has been willed into existence via meme magic. I imagine his future appearances in Civ games will also reference this story, and in a roundabout way, I think that's kind of cool. It's not real, but it is real, and either way, it's fun. Why not? Now we can add Nuclear Gandhi to the list of meme magic concepts like Santa Claus and North Dakota.
Oh no! Oh no! No, no.
Anyway, back to our main story. Civilization 1 is almost finished. Huge strides have been made, and Sid was ready to let some other people, other than his co-designer, Bruce Shelley, try out the game. But he was only willing to let a different Bruce play it. His younger brother, Bruce Meier. This was the day that Sid discovered that his little god game had an interesting effect on people. Sid was visiting family one day and was open to letting his younger brother, Bruce, playtest the latest version of Civilization. So he gave the game to his little brother and said, "Alright buddy, I gotta go watch my newborn son. I'll come check on you in a little bit, okay? See you soon." Bruce took the game, they headed their separate ways. Sid gets distracted, and before he knows it, the next time he looks at the clock, 6 hours have passed. He runs back to the computer room to check on Bruce. He opens the door and sees Bruce completely enthralled and completely unaware of how much time had passed. The one more turn effect had just become reality, and the game wasn't even finished yet. For those of you who don't know, the one more turn effect is what makes people equate the games to crack. Just one more turn, then I'll quit and go to bed. I just need to finish building this catapult. Okay, now this guy is trying to attack me, so just one more turn so I can defend myself properly. Okay, I've got him on the retreat. Just one more turn so I can use my catapult on this guy's cities. Ooh, I got the tech to upgrade. Just give me one more turn and then I can upgrade to a trebuchet. On and on and on until it's 5 in the morning, the sun is coming up, and you're going, oh no. Sid attributes this effect to simple plus simple equals complex, drawing comparisons to chess. Understanding each chess piece is simple, but it's the plans within plans that make things really compelling. Those are the decisions, the thinking ahead that can get you to stay up for hours and hours and hours. For example, understanding that making a farm for your city leads to more food is easy to understand. But it's when you start to plan out 12 different cities, each with different military units, and you want to go conquer the other guy, but to do that, you're going to have to make these amount of units with this amount of food, and you need this much production, but also don't forget the happiness of your empire. That's when it gets interesting. So much so that it gets real easy to lose track of time. But anyway, now that 2 different Bruces had given the game their seal of Bruce approval, it was time to open up playtesting to non-Bruces. Sid allowed for his peers at Microprose to try the game out. and it was an instant office hit. People were constantly coming up to Sid and telling him, dude, you gotta add this, you gotta add that. Some things that we think of Civilization staples were actually suggestions from his coworkers at the time, such as, what if you could build the 7 world wonders? Or what if there were more than 7? He would go through many iterations of the game at this point. Through this process, though, a lot of things were also removed. The game at one point had a mechanic relating to the rise and fall of nations. The tech tree was going through constant changes. At one point, there was even a secondary tech tree for minor discoveries like beer brewing. There were landmine weapons at one point that he just couldn't get to work because they would just completely break the AI. At one point there were religious leaders, and then there weren't. And then of course, Germany, then no Germany, then fine, put Germany in there with Freddy. Because we're down to the wire, and it's time to publish the game. The folks in marketing were antsy to get this thing over with. This is a strategy game. Ugh. It's only going to appeal to hardcore nerds. It's not gonna turn a profit anyway. So their feeling was something like, let's give it the big push it needs to get anyone to even give it a chance and get this over with. No matter what though, Sid was happy. He got to make the game he would want to play. He loved it. His family and friends loved it, so that was enough for him. If the game had been a massive flop with everyone else, I wouldn't have been shocked in the slightest. Of course, it wasn't. It had slow success at first, like his other recent projects, but then an absolutely overwhelming tidal wave of popularity, which was a lot for humble Sid Meier, who just wanted to make fun computer games, and wasn't used to being interviewed so much.
It's good to be the king.
Allow me to introduce you to Brian Reynolds. Brian would one day form a company with Sid, but at the moment, he had just gotten his foot in the door at Microprose. And they had him programming their answer to Leisure Suit Larry, Microprose's Rex Nebular and the Cosmic Gender Bender. I have no idea how Brian felt about programming that game, but at least they let him design a strategy game afterwards. That game would be called Colonization. Sid Meier's Colonization, to be precise, despite Sid not coding any of it and only helping toward the end of its development. As usual, this appeared to be a decision by the marketing department. Funny how that works. Your nerdy strategy game gets super popular, and suddenly putting your name on the box isn't a mark of low confidence from them anymore. Sid is uncomfortable about it, to say the least. He is very quick to acknowledge Brian as the main creator of Colonization. So, he went to go ask Brian how he felt about Sid Meier's potentially getting put on the game. And to his surprise, Brian welcomed the idea. After all, having the Sid Meier's branding on his game would probably mean more people would play it. And if it was successful, Brian would get to make more games. So I conceded. Sid Meier's now meant Sid Meier's mentored and approved instead of Sid Meier personally coded. I think some part of me probably knew it was inevitable. Well, it wasn't long before Microprose wanted a sequel to their big hit, Civilization, and Sid Meier didn't care to be the lead designer of Civ anymore. He loved Brian's work on Colonization, so Brian would be chosen as the designer of Civ 2, with Sid acting as mentor when necessary. This pattern would continue to today, with every mainline Civilization game being designed by someone different. Back to when Civ 2 was being developed. As Sid feared, Bill Steely's push into the arcade market did not succeed. Bill was forced to sell Microprose to some new corporate overlords in 1993 named Spectrum Holobyte, and stepped down as head of the studio. Spectrum Holobyte would even take the Microprose name as it had better name recognition than their own. And as Sid had sold his shares to Bill years ago, it was official. Microprose wasn't really ours anymore. The corporate overlords were in charge now, and their new mandate was to crank out nothing but licensed slop. Civilization 2 happened to release while under their rule, but not really by their making. they predicted it would only sell 38,000 units. Civilization II would go on to sell over 1 million units. Brian and Sid were very happy with how Civ 2 released, but unfortunately it was the exception. Under their new management, for several years, everyone at Microprose was being forced to work on licensed games that they may or may not care about at all. And there wasn't a sign that that was going to change anytime soon. They were worried that they wouldn't be able to make the games that they wanted to play anymore. So, Sid, Brian, and composer Jeff Briggs, making 3, would plan to make their own company, where they could make what they wanted to make. The company would come to be called Firaxis, which is where Sid works to this day as creative development director. But at that time, they still had to get out of Microprose. The soon-to-be Firaxis boys' separation from their former company was amicable, if only because Spectrum Holobyte, wearing the skin suit of Microprose, knew that the 3 of these guys could carve out the insides of their company like a pumpkin if they wanted to. They could easily convince the rest of the employees to come with them to Firaxis if they so desired, and Microprose could probably try to sue the 3 of them if they did that, and it would be a giant mess for all parties involved. So the 3 of them simply backed away slowly with their hands up, fulfilling whatever obligations they had left, and then bailing. One of the consequences of this, though, was that Sid Meier, when he left for Firaxis, did not retain the rights to Civilization. The new Microprose guys could still make sequels to his original creation. They owned the IP now. The history of the Civilization IP is relatively complicated, and it involves Hasbro making their own Civ computer game at one point. All of the events are described by Sid in his book as corporate shenanigans, which I think is an accurate summary. But let me try to explain it with the actual details as simply as I can. Francis Tresham of England in 1980 makes the board game Civilization through the company Heartland Trefoil. It gets licensed for release in the US by a company called Avalon Hill. Sid never played the board game, but Bruce Shelley was a previous Avalon Hill employee, so it's possible the board game had some influence on the computer game, though not through the guy who coded the entire thing. Bill Steely works out a deal with Avalon Hill to share the Civilization name rights for a small fee and a cross-promotional flyer in every box. So, Civilization 1 for the computer gets released, and it explodes in popularity. Avalon Hill, the owner of the Civ board game, gets jealous and makes their own computer game called Advanced Civilization. Civilization 2 for the computer then comes out. Sid, Brian, and Jeff all leave Microprose to create Firaxis, and then things get weird, because Avalon Hill licenses their Civilization board game rights out to Activision to have them make a video game called Civilization Call to Power. And both of them sue Microprose for copyright infringement. Activision had the money, and Avalon Hill had the legal standing. Well, the new corporate overlords at Microprose, which remember was previously known as Spectrum Holobyte, did not take kindly to this. Instead of countersuing, they made a bold business decision. They went to Heartland Trefoil. Remember, Heartland Trefoil are the original owners of the English board game Civilization, which was licensed out to Avalon Hill in the US. Microprose goes to Heartland Trefoil and buys the entire company, meaning that they now own the licensing rights to the original Civ board game, completely removing the legal ground that Avalon Hill was standing on. And then in the courtroom that day, I assume, the Microprose guys pointed at the Avalon Hill guys and said, nah, you don't have the licensing rights, and now we do, something to that effect. The Avalon Hill guys lost so much to Microprose's buyout of Heartland Trefoil that they were actually forced to sell their company to avoid bankruptcy. And who did they sell it to? American toy monger conglomerate Hasbro. And then, 8 days after buying Avalon Hill, Hasbro buys Microprose too. Talk about corporate shenanigans. Hasbro made one big push at using their newly acquired Civilization intellectual property in 1999. They released a game called Civilization II: Test of Time and slapped their newly owned Microprose label on it. In the very same year, Activision releases their Civilization game, Civilization Call to Power, which again, the licensing rights were given out to Activision by Hasbro now. So we got two different Civ games, neither of them being made by Sid Meier. Sid Meier, sitting in his office in Firaxis, also releases a game in 1999, a spiritual successor to the Civilization series, although he couldn't use the name in the title. But with all this corporate nonsense about who owned the rights to what, Sid had a trump card. Hasbro didn't own his name. Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri would release the very same year as Hasbro's two Civ titles, and I'll give you a quick guess as to which one of these three was a hit.
I plan to live forever, of course. But barring that, I'd settle for a couple thousand years. Even 500 would be pretty nice.
And if you guessed Civilization in Space, you're correct! Only one of the three Civ games that came out in 1999 is remembered today. And it's the one that has Sid Meier's on the box. Which is when Hasbro realized something. They were never, ever going to profit from the Civilization IP without it being in Sid Meier's hands. So, in a shocking turn for what usually happens when a giant conglomerate gets a beloved old video game IP,
it's my IP to sit on and do nothing with.
Hasbro essentially handed over the rights to Firaxis, taking whatever cut they could get, and thus Sid Meier's name had gone from a mark of low confidence so long ago by the marketing department to not only being a stamp of quality for the consumer, but to being the deciding factor of his burgeoning indie studio winning out versus a corporate giant. The Civilization series would continue in Firaxis' hands to this day, and to large success. They've had their share of flops like any studio, and people bicker about which Civ is the best one, but on the whole, Civilization has been a pretty consistently solid series, especially considered to a lot of other long-standing game series. And I can say that I've thoroughly enjoyed the ones that I've played. 4, 5, 6, and now Civilization 1. I'd like to end this video with the final paragraph of Sid Meier's book. I think that in life, as in game design, you have to find the fun. There is joy out there waiting to be discovered, but it might not be where you expect it. You can't decide what something's going to be before you embark on it, and you shouldn't stick with a bad idea just because you're fond of it. Take action as quickly and repeatedly as possible, take advantage of what you already know, and take liberties with tradition. But most importantly, take the time to appreciate the possibilities, and make sure all of your decisions are interesting ones. Hey there, thanks for watching to the end of the video. And a huge thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon and YouTube and Twitch. If you enjoyed this kind of video of me talking about a game developer, let me know who else I should talk about in the future. I'll be looking out for those comments down below. Obviously, there are many interesting people that I could make videos about, but if my interest is split between a few different good ones and I'm not sure which way I want to go, I may end up taking a poll to my $5 patrons on Patreon. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, or just want to support me, consider joining. No matter how the subject of the next video is chosen, whether it's by vote or my laser-focused autism, the people on Patreon will always be the first to know. But once again, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!
Wenn du nächstes Spiel einbaust, wird das sofort verboten. I just love Latina Sonic. By the way, Verac, go ahead and pronounce Bundeszentrale für Kinder- und Jugendmedienschutz for me, really quick.
Okay, here, watch me do it. Here it comes. Here comes my perfect German. You ready? Just kidding. Bundeszentrale für Kinder- und Jugendmedienschutz. And let me follow that up with another personal favorite. Krankenwagen.